So what I've been thinking about doing here during my quick little lunch break is to show people how to use the Delver editor, since I don't think we've actually done a quick tutorial on how to use this. You've probably watched Joshua during his streams uh, using it to put levels together, but I don't think we ever actually did a series of tutorials around this, so I think that's what I want to do during this stream. But I'm just gonna give it a minute, let people find their way in here before I start. Let's see. While I'm waiting, let's kind of noodle around. Cool. It looks like we might actually be live now. So let's start over. Hey, my name is Chad. I'm one of the developers here on the Delver project. And today I'm going to show you how to use this Delver editor. This is the editor that we used to make the game, and it also ships with it. It's there in the local files alongside the Delver install on Steam. So if you have Delver on Steam, you should have this already. And I think it's just a really cool tool to play around with, and I'm excited to see what the modding community can do with it. You can use this to make full levels to load into, but you can also make the little dungeon chunks that get loaded up in the game. And you can also do some neat stuff. Since we're a procedural game, we could just tell it, hey, just make us a bunch of rooms. So this is something you can do in the Delver editor, which is, there, I just made a level, I didn't touch anything, I could save this out and use it. I could modify it, I don't want that pot there, boom. We could do stuff like that. You can do this for basically every area in the game, if you wanted to. And then I could just drop in and I could play this area if I wanted to. But I think what I want to do actually is let's just do something from scratch. That's going to show us how to do things better. I'm going to make a new level. Whoops. That looks like a bad vertex buffer. Let's start over. You might find some bugs in the Delver editor. It's just good enough for us to make the game with. We still want to make it a little easier to use for people, so there's probably going to be some bugs in there, but hopefully it doesn't just outright crash on you. And if it does, let us know. We can always fix this stuff. Alright, so DelvEdit. The basics of what you need to know is that Delver is inherently a 2D based engine. You'll notice here that we have this grid of 2D tiles, and we can move this selection box around just by pointing at it. We can click and drag and kind of select portions of this. So the basics of creating a level are just dragging out this selection box and hitting enter, and you can carve out areas like that. If we wanted to, we can make a couple of rooms and then connect them together with some hallways, and this is kind of the basics of editing levels for Delver. This is kind of what our first levels that we started making looked like too, something like this. So now we have a level we could drop in here. I can hit the P key at any time to start playing the level, which just drops us right in the game. And we can explore here. And yeah, this is decent. It's kind of boring. It filled it with some stuff though that we didn't have to put down. There's a lot of procedural generation that goes on in Delver even after the fact for a generated level like this. The dungeon theme knows that with this ground texture, it can put things down. So we should see stuff like those crystals appear, and we don't actually have to put those down anywhere. A better example of that would be, let's repaint this actually. There's a newer dungeon theme that we're using. Let's select this whole area, and you'll see over on the left-hand side, we have these texture pictures. I'm gonna use the texture picker, and I'm gonna use the new dungeon set that we have. That's gonna be the ceiling. Floor is gonna be this cool red clay tile. And we painted this whole area. And when we drag out new areas and carve them, it's gonna be using that same set of textures from the side. We can also select something pre-made like we just did and just like swap out the floor color. So that's just like an easy way to paint areas is by doing that. So now when I drop in the game, you'll see that it's using those textures. You'll also see a lot of this grass that's being put around. That's because the game knows that on dirt and on this red tile texture, it can put grass and rocks and things like that. And it knows that in the corner next to these, I don't know if it's based off of this brick texture or if it's on this clay tile, that you can put boxes in the corners. So it's going to generate some of this stuff for you. You don't actually have to go in and hand place a lot of this stuff. Okay, it's kind of dark, so I think the next thing we should do is put some lights in here. An easy way to do that is to just right-click somewhere where you want to put a torch, go to markers. We could put a torch marker down. Now when we play the game, it's going to put a torch there for us. It's going to find the nearest wall and put a torch on it. And we don't have to actually figure out what that torch looks like or anything. It just knows that for this dungeon theme, it has some lights that I can use, and it's going to put one on the wall. Same thing with monsters. If you put a monster marker down, we don't really care what the monster is. We just know we want a monster to be in there. So now when we play, it's going to make a monster for us. And every time we play, it's going to be something different. But it's going to be pulled from that dungeon theme. Same with loot. And there's some other markers in here, like doors if we wanted to. We could put a door marker down. Now we have this room filled up with stuff. Die bat. We got some loot, there's a torch on the wall, we got this door we can walk through. We didn't have to manually set any of that stuff up. So that's an easy way to put some of this stuff down. So we just start putting some markers around. Let's put some more torches around. And we can preview what the lighting is going to look like by hitting this L key. That toggles lighting on and off. So now if we wanted to, we could decide, oh, actually, let's get rid of that so there's this dark area between these two bright areas. And we can just fill this up, make sure there's not any areas that are totally dark. Yeah, that looks good. Probably put one here in the corner to show off that there's a hallway there. Now when we play the game, it's already looking better. There's something to fight. Got this door we can go in. Got these torches around. Got some different floor textures. That's pretty cool. So those are kind of the basics. One of the other things to watch out for when you're painting textures is this paint adjacent checkbox. What that does, if I select this tile here and I say, I want to use a different wall texture, I pick this brick texture, it's going to be putting that on the tiles next to it as well. If I uncheck it and do that same thing, it's only putting it on this tile, so it doesn't actually transfer to any of the tiles around it. If I drag this up, it'll be easier to see if we change the lower wall texture. You'll see that it paints this tile, but if we drag it down, the lower wall texture of this one hasn't actually changed. Which brings in another new feature that we can talk about. Delver is a tile-based 2D engine, but every tile has different heights. If we wanted to, we could drag out this selection and decide, hey, this ceiling should be taller. You can drag these control points around to kind of play with some of that stuff. So now we have a really tall room. You can also just drag the edges of it to make slopes if you want to do something like that. So you can select just a box of tiles here like that, and then start dragging these sides down to make something that's a little more interesting. And then I just Controlled Z there to put that back. Let's fix that ceiling. Put that back. Use that red tile texture again. I'm going to turn paint adjacent back on, since I think what I want to do, actually let's keep that off. What I want to do is I want to make this wall use a different texture. If I just drag that out, those tiles, and hit enter, That's going to carve that out, which isn't really what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do is just change the texture. So if I hit Control Z and do that again, but use Shift Enter instead, that's just going to paint those tiles. It's not actually going to carve it out like Enter does. So you can use that to sort of drag out a selection box like this and hit Shift Enter, and it's going to just repaint all of that stuff that you have selected. It's just a good way to modify some tiles without actually carving it out. Otherwise, like, maybe we don't actually want to do something like that. Or if we wanted to apply this whole selection here, we could just select the whole thing and Shift Enter. Whereas if you just hit Enter, it's just going to carve out that whole box, and that's not really what we want. Yeah, so let's make this a little more interesting. Also what we could do, we could just drag down the floor here. Let's turn paint adjacent back on. For the lower wall, let's use this step tile. Now we have this lowered section in the middle of the room. That's pretty cool. We do this a lot in the base Delver game, just to make the floors a little more interesting. Let's make sure that lines up with the texture. We can show off another mode here. With that selected, if we hit the V key, that's going to toggle vertex mode on and off. So with it off, it's just in plain selection mode. But if we hit V, now we get these little vertices that we can play around with. So if we wanted to, we could put like a dirt mound here, just by dragging these two center ones up. Yeah, that's cool. Makes it look like this dirt piled up from somewhere. Somebody's asking, what happens if you place a torch somewhere that's not next to a wall? If I try putting a torch here, and then I play the game, it doesn't actually put the torch there because it can't find some place to put it. I think if we drag this floor up, then it does find a place to put it, so it's going to start spawning. But just like this, that little lip is not enough. Or I think maybe, I wonder if I drag this ceiling down, will it find that? Yeah. So that's kind of a way, it's just to keep torches from just sitting on the floor or going in weird places. I'm going to get rid of that. Let's see, so we got this basic room here. We can make it a little more interesting by dragging out selection boxes and modifying those tiles a little bit. Kind of like this. Don't forget about your ceilings. Everybody forgets about their ceilings in video games. But just making your ceilings a little more interesting adds so much to it. Look at that. Already better. Not Deus Ex level ceilings, but they're pretty good. Let's drag this back down. Cool. So this is already a better room. We got something to fight. We got some loot. It's still pretty basic though. You can really tell that this is just 2D. So let's start mucking around with this a little more. Let's make a new level here. Then we can start getting a little more advanced. Alright, so now that we did sort of the intro level, let's do something a little more interesting. I'm going to drag out this selection box here. I'm going to reset my textures back to the regular brick, the floor. Let's go back to T1, and let's make this water. Cool. Actually, this is a little too wide. Let's select that and hit delete, and it'll get rid of those tiles for us. Let's drag this ceiling way up. And then let's carve out another area on the wall. This is going to be a good showcase of these liquid textures that we use. The game already knows, because of the texture atlas, I think tiles.dat has controls for some of these different tiles. Tiles can do things like emit light or emit sound. It also knows that if a tile's a liquid or not. And because of that, it knows that this T1 texture 4 here is a liquid texture. So if we use that, it just turns into a liquid. We don't actually need to muck with it. If we drag those tiles around, it's going to do things like put the waterfall on it for us. So we don't actually need to do that texture. It already knows that the wall should look like that. So it's a good way to just put waterfalls everywhere. The water edge is actually a separate mesh that gets generated. If I kind of go here in the corner, you can kind of see it, that it almost lines up with the water, but not quite, just to avoid Z fighting. But in the game, it looks like it's one surface, and you don't need to worry about that. Also, it's the same with lava. If we switch over here to lava, it's going to do the same thing. So now we have this thing that doesn't make any sense. I guess this lava and this water goes together somehow. So let's back this up. Yeah, I'll probably be posting this on YouTube sometime. Let's do something like this. I think I want there to be a waterfall in this corner. So I'm just going to delete this tile here. I'm going to repaint that tile so that it looks like the rest of ours. Then I'm going to just drag this up. I'm going to drag that up. I'm going to drag the ceiling down. And now it looks like that water is coming from somewhere. Kind of dark in here though. We have this area. For this one, I'm going to drag the ceiling up. I want this to be a little dry alcove that the player can stand in. Maybe we can put some loot over here. So for the floor, I'm going to switch back to this tile texture. Let's set that lower wall to be the step again. There, that looks pretty good. Then maybe we can drag these corners down. Yeah, this is since this is a 2D engine, you really can't do room over room like this. That would be really cool. Yeah, like somebody's saying in the stream, you can do that with custom meshes that you could drop in, which I'm going to show here in a second. But right now, I'm going to do something like this. I want there to be this dry area, maybe with some loot that the player can grab. But I want this middle part to be water. What I could do is I could just drag this down and switch it back over to using the water texture. But that's kind of slow. Another thing you can do is just point the selection box at something and hit G, and it will grab the textures for whatever that tile is. So if I point it here at the water and hit G, it's going to grab all of those textures. I don't need to go muck through the texture picker to go grab them again. So it's a good way to do things like I'm just going to grab that, and I'm going to turn off paint adjacent, and I'm going to paint this and drag it down, and there. And now we have this little alcove. Let's continue this a little more. You can also copy and paste tiles. So I could grab this and hit Control C to copy. I could hit Control V, whoops, Control V there, and then I just copied it in one. I'm going to remove that one. Let's put the loot marker actually here instead. And I think this is using the wrong wall texture, so let's switch that over. That will be dungeon brick. Wait, did I pick the right one? No. Escape is not clicking. Yeah, so now we could do something like this. And like if we wanted to, we could just drag this whole part down. That's kind of interesting. It gives us this little alcove we can grab that from. Or if we wanted to, we could just delete all of this again. Maybe I'll do something like this. We want it to look like this water is coming in from somewhere. Let's raise that back up. And now it looks like you have this effect of this water coming from somewhere. But the player can still walk in there, so that's not great. We should probably block that off. So this is a good time to talk about entities. So if you right-click anywhere on a tile, you get this, you can do this place entity option, which has a whole list of the entities that we used in making the game. What I'm looking for is underneath misc meshes, we have these bars. And now that we have these bars in here, I can click to drag this thing around. I can click and hold Control to snap it to the grid, but you'll notice that it's moving in the Z-axis as well. So now, like, this is stuck in the floor. Not really what we want. If we want more precise placement, we can do things like hold down the Shift key to constrain it just to the X and Y axis. So now it's not going to move up and down at all. So now I can hold Control and I can just drag those bars in there. That'll keep players from being able to walk back there. Cool. You'll notice when you select it that it has this box around it. That's the collision box. That's on there because this is a solid entity. If we turned is solid to false, then all of a sudden this is not solid anymore. We could walk through it. So that's one thing to be aware of when you're doing this. You can change that collision box by modifying these values here. If I change that from 0.05 to just 0.5, you'll notice that the selection box around it, this collision box, this takes up basically a whole tile now. So now that's going to block me way before I get to it, which that's not really what I want. So let's put that back to 0.05 again. There. If we wanted to, we could pick a different mesh texture for this, but you'll see since I'm using a texture that has 4 different mesh, you can make some weird looking stuff here. Let's back that up. There. Never stream without coffee. All right, let's make this look even nicer. Yeah, thanks. This is a cool little level editor. It started really basic. The first level editor in the game, I think, was just like MS Paint, where you could just drag out gray selections of pixels, and that would turn into a level. And then we got different floor heights, and that didn't work anymore. So yeah, now we have this really cool level editor that I think might be the best System Shock editor that the world has ever seen. Maybe somebody will do something with that someday. I think that would be great. Let's put down this dungeon sets door arch here. This is this really cool arch that Joshua made, which is actually a group of entities. If we right click on it and ungroup it, we can see it's actually a mesh and some collision volumes that make up that. But it's a lot easier to work with when it's grouped like this. So these, we use these kind of all over the dungeon area, usually to call out that, hey, there's an exit here, but we also just kind of like slap them into the wall to make these, oh, Josh was saying I could turn on show boxes. Not quite sure what he means by that. Maybe he's talking about collision boxes. But what I want to do with this is use it just as kind of a little call out that make this look not quite as boxy. You can use static meshes like this to break up tiles. Otherwise, it's really apparent that, hey, this is sort of like a 2D tile engine, but you start slapping stuff like this down, and it looks a lot better. And it can work with the tile basis of the game as well. Like, we could drag that down, and now this looks like... Oh, we can also... Let's drag that up a little bit in this corner. There. So now it looks like this water is going somewhere. It's not just disappearing into the wall. We can't walk back there. We can move the bars forward a tad if we wanted to. There. That looks pretty cool. Spruce that up. Alright, and let's do a little more with this area. Let's grab that again. I really liked how this looked on the wall here. Delver Shock. Delver Shock would be really fun. I think I played around with using the System Shock 1 textures while I was making this editor. There might be some screenshots of that around somewhere. That was super fun. Yeah, so we could just sort of like slap this into the wall here. Let's copy that out, and then I can use the X and Y keys to constrain this to an axis, like here with Y. It's only on the Y axis, it's not going to go anywhere else. Same with Z for up and down. Same with X for moving that way. So that's a good way just to, like, if I put this back here against the wall, I could drag it back and forth without worrying that it's going to come off of it. And we can just make sure that we don't get any Z fighting there. With Y on, we can also show off, if we hold down the Alt key with this selected and drag, it's going to drag out a duplicate of the object that we have selected. One too many there. And then we can use the same. We could select both of these and hit X and hit Alt, and we can drag these both out to the other side of the wall. It's an easy way to decorate without having to go in and manually place all this stuff. Cool. This is already starting to look a little better. Maybe those are too tall. Let's bring them down a little bit. How's that? Yeah, you can use props in a lot of ways. This little archway has given us so much. We can use this for all sorts of things. This might be the most versatile mesh created for Delver. This thing has been awesome. I've abused that in ways I don't think Joshua ever intended. I think I was seeing something floating around on Twitter the other day that was showing off in Oblivion. They did something like they had a shelf mesh like this, which, you know, that's a pretty tall shelf. Sometimes what you need, though, is just like a workbench. So an easy way to make a workbench is to just take a shelf like that and just like slam it into the ground. And hey, look, now you have a workbench. And in-game, you would never know that, like, underneath this, there's a whole shelf just shoved into the ground. So yeah, good game development tips there. Sometimes you just need a workbench, and all you have is a table. Yeah, let's put that there. Yeah, that's the thing that you need to worry about when you do some tricks like that, is like when it was right up here next to the edge, you get all that Z fighting, which that looks gnarly. You don't actually want that. So if you just drag it over a little bit, perfect. Nobody will, Z fighting problem fixed forever. Nobody will ever see that. So now that we have this cool hacky table there, yeah, that looks great. Yeah, that's another thing you can do. Let's show that off. So if I snap that to the grid again and drag it out, we get all that Z fighting on the side. Another trick there is if you change the scale, we can change the scale property. If we change this property properly, it will scale it up or down. And here's like a little tiny shelf where we can make that bigger. But if you just make it like slightly smaller, like slightly smaller, that's going to take care of the Z fighting. That's also a good hacky way to get around that. That might be changing your pixel scales a little bit, but I don't think in reality anybody's ever going to notice that. That's pretty cool. maybe we should put something on that shelf while we're doing it. Let's go to Entity. I think we can go to Clutter. And what we could do is we could do something like, we could put this gold piece over there. And the player could pick that up now. Cool. Of course, placing all of this stuff by hand would be really annoying. So another thing we have are these things called prefabs. So if I go into clutter, one of these items here is random clutter. Every time I play now, that entity is going to switch out to be something else. And I don't need to define what it's going to be. The game will just pick something from that list of things. That's cool. I could drag that up and I can put that over here. And I could get rid of that and I could just make another one of these. And now every time I hit play, it's going to fill these shelves up with stuff, but it's going to be different every time. I don't need to worry about actually picking it out. And that's because this is actually a prefab. You can see in here that it's pulling from the category clutter, which is here. This is the clutter list. And inside of it, it says, hey, this could be a candle 1, this could be a tankard, this could be a bowl, this could be a cup, this could be a plate. It could be a bunch of that. So we use stuff like this all the time to make it a lot easier to put this stuff down, since actually filling that stuff up would take forever. And since this is a procedural generated game, you might see this chunk again someday. And having even the little elements of it be random makes it feel a lot better. We use this all over the place. I think even this bookcase. Oh yeah, I just hit the T key here to rotate this thing around. That's an easy way to just rotate it. You can also hold the R key, rotate this stuff around. And then X, Y, and Z will let you rotate it in the other directions, which doesn't really make any sense for this. But what I wanted to show off with this, that every time I hit play, even the positions of these books are different every time. Because the way Joshua set this up is if we... Dungeon sets bookcase. Yeah, let's go back to dungeon sets, bookcase. If I ungroup that, you can see that it's this bookcase shelf, but then inside of it are all these little prefabs of type bookshelf that are set up to just have this list of different books that I can fill it up with. So we made one bookcase, we slapped it everywhere, and it's going to look different all the time. You don't need to worry about filling it up. Unless you wanted to, you could always just put static books in there, but what would be the fun of that? This is a roguelike. Everything should be random, even the stuff that you don't care about. So we have this. I think what I want is the player to start somewhere up here. I'm just copy and pasting this. I'm gonna grab those textures and paint the walls with Shift-Enter there, just to make sure that these new tiles that I exposed are using the right stuff. And I'll drag the ceiling down. Drag these corners down. Make kind of a neat alcove here as well. So I think this is where the player is going to start. So we should put a player start marker there too, just in case. So the player will start over here, they'll wander in through this water. They'll get over here, they'll find some loot. Maybe there should be a monster to fight. We could put one there. But I think what I want to do is to show off these ladders. So we could put a ladder in the corner. We'll just slap this up against the wall. I think what I want to do is put a room farther up here. So how would we do that? I'm going to grab the textures from here. And I'm going to drag out this box. I'm going to hit enter. Then let's pull the ceiling up and let's pull this floor up. And let's change that lower wall texture back to the brick. Yeah, that's I think what we want. I think we can pull these up. Yeah, it's a G key that grabs textures. There we go. So now we have this ladder. We should be able to climb up and get over there. That was kind of wonky, so I'm going to pull it over. Being able to just test your layout by hitting the P key is super useful. It really reduces the time to fix some issues that you find. I think maybe what I want to do is copy that and paste it around here so that when you climb up the ladder, there's a little landing. Let's make sure that these are all using the right textures. There. So if I play this, now I'm going to climb up this ladder. There's a little alcove here, which we could make a little more interesting. We could just drag this down. We could put a torch up here to call out to the player that when they're down here, like, hey, there's something up there, and I can actually see the path up. So you can see that you can climb up here to get out. Actually, yeah, fast iteration time when you're designing levels is so useful. A lot of level editing these days has turned into placing a bunch of static meshes around, and that's your level. But that means that you need to have all these static meshes around ahead of the time, or you need to gray box everything. I really like this more like the old school style of level design, where it was either BSP or brush based, where you could use those to block out your level, and then you'd go back in to pretty it up later on. I just feel a lot more comfortable designing levels in something like this. Maybe the old Unreal Engine spoiled me. Because after playing through this, I think I want this to be taller. Like, I can just drag this whole thing out. And let's drag this floor up. Same with the ceiling. And then I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste that one to make sure it's the same height. I think the player will be able to fit there, but maybe this should be a little taller as well. So yeah, we just made some decent size changes to this, and it was pretty easy. Now I can crawl up here, and I can get to this landing, and it's a lot taller. This looks a lot more interesting than that first level. Did you not like light casting shadows for Delver? We have some of that. It's just really coarse. Like you can kind of see it. If I put an actual light entity down, an ambient light, and hit the L key, if I deleted this tile in the middle, you'll notice that it actually doesn't cast a light over there. If I make the range on it like a lot bigger, this will be easier to see. Where it does cast shadows on the wall, but it's really coarse. They're basically tile-based shadows. So you do get some of this lighting in there. It's not light map lighting or anything like that. Just since these levels are being assembled at runtime, you have to do all of the lighting either on the fly per pixel style, or you need a long process that does the light map generation at runtime, which that is really slow. I played around with it, but I never got it working the way that I wanted to, and then at the end of the day, I think it looks fine like this. Like, it'd be cool to see a version of the Delver engine with per pixel shadows and everything, but since all of the monsters are just like sprite entities, that might look weird too. If you get a monster facing you and you have a light on the side shining down, the shadow is going to be like super thin. It's not going to be the actual face-on shadow of it that's coming down. So that would look really, really weird. Yeah, for the levels themselves, it's vertex lighting. So it's really fast. We bake the lighting up ahead of time, And then we basically only need to worry about dynamic lights after that. Yeah, so we got this cool thing. Let's use what we made here. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, we could probably fix some of these lighting bugs a little bit if we wanted to. Like, we could put that torch maybe over here and it would make more sense. Like, that looks a little better. I kind of like the sort of global illumination style lighting that it gives you. It's just kind of softer. And it means you don't need to put as many lights around since the lights do bleed around. Yeah, so this is cool. Maybe let's make a little loot alcove over here as well. Let's drag this up and drag this down. We can change all of these textures to something like this brick. Yeah, I mean, in the real world, lights do bounce off of everything around you, which is something that we're only just now getting able to do in real time. But if you can fake that look any way that you can, hey, go for it. A lot of game development is figuring out what you can fake without actually doing it. Let's put some loot here. I like these little loot alcoves. I don't know if they make any sense, but they look cool and they remind me of old games like I think Dungeon Master did stuff like this, the old tile-based movement games like Grimrock. Yeah, so we got some loot here. Let's also put a monster up here to fight. Yeah, so now when we play this, we're gonna walk in. We'll see that there's this area here. We know there's a monster up there, so we could take him out before we get up there. So we could wait and we could climb up and fight it. That's pretty fun. Yeah, let's show off some kind of fake room over room stuff too. I could put, I think it's in misc meshes. There's this wood bridge. We use this for some room over room stuff, where you can kind of like drag one of these down and like start pulling pieces of it off. Yeah, let's just do that a few times. Now we have like almost a room going on over this water. So we could crawl up there. Yeah, those bridges are so useful. These things are great. Yeah. Monsters don't always know that they can walk on them, so sometimes that's a problem. Like if I put a monster, like this monster here, if it's trying to path over to me, well, he's never going to try to get close. But like this one, I'm too far away from it to just have him come at me, but he thinks that it's water down here. But if I get close enough, he will follow me out. That's one thing I'd like to eventually add, is so that I can add navigation on top of these, but for the most part, we don't use them enough for it to be a problem. Still something I want to fix someday. Another thing to talk about probably is the difference between entities and actual prefabs. You'll notice there's an entity list and there's a prefab list, but they have the same items in it. And that's so if I place an entity down like this chair and you click on it, you can see all the properties of this chair. We could make this, a super powerful chair that you could wail on this all day and probably not break it. The problem would be if you wanted every chair in the game to be like that. If you just put these chairs around and copy them around like that, you'd have to open up this level later and find every one of these and go find its HP and like put them back down to a reasonable value again. That gets really old after a while. Like sometimes you just want a chair to be a chair and to just change it one spot and have the game pick that up. That's what prefabs are for. If we place a prefab chair down from furniture and you click on it, you'll notice that this doesn't give you all of the properties that a normal entity would. You can still place it, you can still rotate it and do that kind of stuff. But you can't modify the properties of it. That's because every time you play the game, it's going to go find the chair in the entities list and go grab that property or those list of properties and apply it to the chair. Because really, you don't care about every single chair being unique, probably. And it makes it easier to just change out the chair in one spot in the entities file and everything would be updated. So kind of my rule of thumb for using things is that if you're going to place entities around, use the prefab unless you really need to change the properties of it, just to make it easier for yourself later if you just decide to change what that thing is. Like these arches here, these are groups, but I can also use the prefab version of that in dungeon sets door arch. And then if we ever decided to change how this door arch looks, this one would get swapped out with the new version, but these would always look like this forever. Just something to be wary of. Yeah, Eldron is asking how these drop shadows are done for the chair. They are stencil shadows. In reality, this is just drawing a big, like, rectangle mesh underneath the chair. And sort of like how I guess you still see this used some days, or I think Wind Waker did this really well with the lighting. This whole volume that's inside gets shaded with the color. And it's the same with, if I made an entity chair, we could change that out. We could go, let's find the shadow. Where are you? Where's it hiding? Shadow type rectangle. We could change that to be a blob, and that would use a different mesh that's sort of like a pixelated volume mesh that Joshua created, which has a neat look to it. But you can see it's sort of the same thing. It's a pyramid that gets projected down. Cool. And it's the same thing with the lights. Yeah, that didn't go well. Let's try that again. I'm gonna get rid of that monster. The lights here on the wall have this halo around them that's using the same thing. Instead of drawing a shadow, though, this is drawing a lighter texture. And it gives it that Wind Waker style effect. You can kind of see it bleed around the corners sometimes. Yeah, so it looks like this is doing some sort of like per pixel lighting, but it's actually just like a voxel sphere that's getting projected around it. That's really cool. Let's put that guy back. I think what I want to do is put some pots over there. So we go prefab, breakables, and then pot. I could put these pots around. Let's just drag out a few of them. Now when I hit play, there's a monster to fight. And there's also all of these pots around, and it's using that same random generation system to put stuff everywhere. So some of them are going to be exploding pots, some of them are going to be the just normal breakable pots. I don't really need to worry about what they are at runtime. That's pretty cool. Yeah, so that's kind of the basics of using the Delver editor. I'm going to start wrapping up here, but if there's anything people wanted to see or had questions about, yeah, this would be the time to ask. Otherwise, I'm just going to noodle around making the ceiling more interesting. That looks a little better. We could just drag these down as well if we wanted to. Yeah, the voxel light spheres do have a lot of polys. I don't know if I'm gonna do this on a regular basis or not. This was pretty fun. I think I would like to show off the different modding features we have in the game, and that does seem like something that I could do. So yeah, I'll probably do more of these kinds of streams in the future. So yeah, if anybody has questions or things that they want more info on, I could show it off in farther of these modding streams. Cool. Yeah, so we could do this all day. I should probably save this level sometime now. I'm gonna go to levels and then test, and what do I call this? Stream level. Oh, diagonal tiles. That is something that I should show off. If I select one of these tiles or just hover over the top of it, if I hit the U key, it will change the tile definition for that tile, which can either be like empty or solid or angled. Angled is one of them. So I could just point at that and hit U. And now I have angled tiles in the wall. These do have limitations around them. It's only angled on the inside like that. But you can use them for stuff like this. That is a good way to make things a little more interesting. Oh no, I totally screwed that up. Let's put water back down where water should be. And then we could make this an angled wall as well. Huh. That ceiling looks pretty weird now. We'll put that back up there. There, so now we have some angled walls to play around with as well. Using this with Unity, yeah, if you go File, Save As, and you save this level as a DAT file, instead of being a binary file with everything mashed together and packed down into a good format for the game, it just saves it as JSON with that DAT. So if you wanted to, you could just go through there and find all the tiles and grab that information out. It's basically whether a tile is solid and just the different floor and ceiling heights at the angles. Yeah, there's probably ways that you could use that. There was a guy earlier on when we were developing Delver that did something about exporting data from Ultima Underworld and saving it into Delver's JSON format. So he made an actual Ultima Underworld to Delver importer process. That was really neat. I wonder what happened to that guy. Yeah, textures are stored by index. They have a couple of different things. There's the texture atlas, which is a string, which is basically this, which is either going to be T1 or T2 or dungeon. And then there's going to be a number, which is going to be like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. That tells it what the actual texture is for this atlas. Cool. I think I'm out of time for today. Thanks everybody for joining me. Yeah, if you have any more questions, definitely send them on. You can find me at Twitter, twitter.com/Cuttigan. You might already be following me there. If you are, yeah, reach out, tell me how the stream went, if I should do this again. But I gotta run. Thanks a lot.